And welcome in. Today, I will be discussing who I think college football's top 10 offenses will be for the 2023 season. I will be going from 10 to 1, and at the end of the video, I will be talking about some offenses that I think will be great, but just missed the list. If you are new to the College Football with Sam community, please hit the subscribe button. Also, hit the notification bell so you can get notified when I post new content. And I want you all to comment your thoughts on who you think the top 10 offenses of college football will be down below. Comment that down before watching the remainder of the video. And also comment who you think the nation's best quarterback, running back, tight end, wide receiver, and offensive linemen are. Comment those down below. And without further ado, let's get right into it. We have Oregon at number 10. And there are 3 bullet points discussing quarterback, running back, and receiver, the 3 main skill positions. Offensive line, there's really no stats to grade on, but I'm going to talk about the offensive lines of all these teams as well. And then there's also 3 bullet points that I just want to discuss the team's scheme, the focus of their attack, and a strength or 2 of theirs, along with any potential breakout candidates or some positions to watch out for this coming season. Oregon is a team that was one of the best offenses in the country last year. They had Bo Nix at quarterback, who will return from a season where he was top 10 in QBR. He had over 500 rushing yards as well, which is not shown on the screen. But in his career as a passer, he has had his ups and downs. We see that he's had over 10,000 career passing yards. In fact, a big chunk of those were just from last year at Oregon, where he had over a 150 passer rating. At Auburn, he averaged in the lower 130s, which is weighed here again on the screen. But him transferring into Oregon was huge. It was absolutely huge. I underestimated his value at Oregon, but what Dan Lanning has done at Oregon in year 1, I can only imagine where they're going to be several years down the road. And Bo Nix returning, it deterred Dante Moore from committing to Oregon, and he went to UCLA instead. But Oregon's set at quarterback. They're even more set at running back, where once again you have transfers. Bucky Irving used to play for Minnesota. Noah Whittington used to play for Western Kentucky. In their careers, they've had over 3,000 rushing yards, over 10 rushing touchdowns, 16 to be exact. And something that you look at, especially when talking about Troy Franklin, who unofficially at the Oregon Pro Day had a sub 440 40 time, Oregon's offense is speed. It's also versatility. They have an underrated tight end room as well, and their offensive line is consistently one of the best in the country. You can thank Alex Mirabal for that, who's now at Miami along with Mario Cristobal's staff, but Dan Lanning, I think, is going to continue this tradition of great offensive lines. Oregon is about speed, and what I like about this new Oregon team and identity is it's a lot more similar to the identity that you had under Chip Kelly and Mark Helfrich before everything went to crap. Like, it is speed and versatility, and they do have a new offensive coordinator, but it is likely that Nix and Irving, I think, will improve from their 2022 season as they're going to be even more settled into the system. Remember, Oregon was in year 1. They were in year 1 in 2022. Year 2, there's going to be a lot more improvement and a lot more concrete cohesion along the team as a whole, not just the offense. A question, though, regarding the offense, I would say, and this is for the defense as well, really for the whole team of Oregon, is can they manage and keep their roster together despite the mass incoming transfers and outgoing transfers? They did lose Dante Thornton, a very talented wide receiver, to Tennessee. At number 9, I do have Georgia. And talking about Georgia is going to be more short. It's not going to be as sweet, but that's because that's just how Georgia's offense is. They don't have nearly the amount of returning production that Oregon has, and they don't have the same amount of transfers coming in. Oregon has 2 transfers coming in at the O-line. They lost Dante Thornton at wide receiver. Georgia just has Dominic Lovett and Ra Thomas coming in to create one of the nation's deepest wide receiver rooms. But the funny thing about it is tight end is the focus of this team, with Brock Bowers and now Oscar Delp, since Darnell Washington is gone after being drafted by the Steelers. A question for Georgia, one who doesn't follow the sport closely, might think that quarterback would be a question for this team. But I digress. Carson Beck has nearly a 160 passer rating. Now, he does not have a whole lot of experience to him. I'll give people who ask that question that. But if you look at Stetson Bennett, if you look at Jake Fromm, Georgia has a reputation of having at least above average quarterback play. Anything besides that is the exception. And recently, under Todd Monken, who's now departed to the Ravens, Georgia has had fantastic quarterback play. At running back, you don't have any elite running backs. Kendall Milton and Dejon Edwards, I think, are above average to good at the best, but you do have an elite O-line and a running back rotation to keep everyone healthy, keep everyone up, and Georgia's offense really is versatile. Their best players are at tight end and O-line. That's where their best players are. And I'd say their best players, not even players, but people are on the sidelines. Georgia recruits better on defense, develops better on defense. I mean, the talent disparity between offense and defense is pretty significant if you look at Georgia recruiting. But the way they develop on defense translates to offense as well. They're great developmentally on offense. Schematically, they're sound. I don't think there will be a huge drop-off from Todd Monken to Mike Bobo in year one just because of the system that Monken and Smart have installed. Expect Georgia to grind opponents to death with their run game, their tight end play. They're super effective in the red zone. They led the nation in, I think, red zone percentage and red zone scores last year, the Georgia Bulldogs did. Number 8, we have Tennessee, which Tennessee's offense is the antithesis of Georgia's. Georgia's is slow. It's like a boa constrictor. They get a field goal, they're happy, but more often than not, they're going to get a touchdown because they just wear down and break your defense. That's what Georgia does. Tennessee, on the other hand, is quick tempo. We do not care about TOP, gunslinging. We're going to heave it to wide receivers who've been schemed to be wide open. We're going to make quarterbacks dominate statistically who we've never even heard of before. Maybe that's something Tennessee and Georgia have in common, developing lower recruited quarterbacks into phenomenal players. Joe Milton was not lowly recruited, though. Recruited as a 4-star, hyped up at Michigan in 2020. He fell off, Cade McNamara replaced him, and he went to Tennessee, where now he's poised to be a starter. This will be his final season of collegiate eligibility. He's had around a 140 passer rating. In his career, he's had 2,540 passing yards, 17 passing touchdowns, 6 interceptions. If you can't tell already, all these statistics are the career of the players listed, all added together. It's not last season's statistics. That would be crazy if Tennessee last year had 3,000 rushing yards. They didn't. They had I think close to 2,000. But under 2,000. Jalen Wright and Jabari Small, speaking of the running backs, I think that's an underrated running back room. They have experience, nearly 36 rushing touchdowns in both of those guys' careers. The wide receiver room, they lost Cedric Tillman and Jalen Hyatt, but they retained their yards after catch guy and Brew McCoy and Ramel Keaton and Squirrel White. Look, those are guys that I think will replace Cedric Tillman and Jalen Hyatt. And Josh Heupel, he knows what he's doing. And his up-tempo offense, his schematics, many would argue doesn't help his defense, and it doesn't, but it produces an offense that will just tear through the majority of defenses in the country. So Joe Milton, I think he'll dominate statistically. I don't view him as a top 5 quarterback. Might not even be a top 10, top 15 quarterback, but with his arm and with the scheme that Tennessee runs, those career stats that you see on the screen are going to more than double after 2023. I'll guarantee you that. At number 7, this might be a surprise to many of you, but to me it is not. Wisconsin. Now with Tanner Mordecai, with an upgraded wide receiver room, but most importantly, upgraded offensive minds, bringing in Phil Longo to replace Bobby Engram, who replaced Joe Rudolph. And really, it was Paul Chryst running the whole thing. So you go from one of the most outdated offenses ever in existence, it was toxic to watch, to now one of the most modern offenses in existence. And you bring in an experienced signal caller, an experienced player, a guy who, out of all the quarterbacks in this top 10, has one of the highest passer ratings in his career. You bring him in at quarterback under center, and he did not have a good spring game. He threw multiple interceptions, some of which were a result of bad wide receiver play. That's an area where I would look to be one of Wisconsin's concerns is actually wide receiver play. I don't think their wide receiver play will match up to the potential they have at quarterback, but it's a work in progress. It is year one, and I think Wisconsin this year has the best chance to be what TCU was last year. They have solid returning production. They have a new underrated staff, though I don't think Luke Fickell is nearly as underrated of a head coach as Sonny Dykes is, just because everyone knows who Luke Fickell is. Everyone views him as a top 10 coach. No one viewed Sonny Dykes as anywhere close to the top 10 entering last year. But anyway, Wisconsin's new air raid scheme, it gives them a huge advantage because the rest of the Big Ten really hasn't had to deal with the air raid. They haven't. The SEC has to a certain degree with Mississippi State and Mike Leach, rest in peace. Alabama, I would argue, while not exactly running an air raid, they love to pass the ball around a lot. The ACC, you've had great quarterback play. The Big 12 and the Pac-12 have loved the air raid for years now, especially the Big 12. The Big 10 has been the least pass or quarterback dominant conference, Power 5 level, for a while. And now you're bringing in the antithesis of that. And I think that's going to mess with a lot of Big Ten defenses and with a lot of teams. And this air raid doesn't just utilize quarterbacks and wide receivers and do away with tight ends, running backs, and offensive line. No. Phil Longo's air raid, if you don't remember, produced a great running game at North Carolina. And Wisconsin has a lot of their offensive linemen returning from last season, a lot of highly recruited, highly developed offensive linemen. And they also bring in Luke Fickell's starting center from Cincinnati in Jake Renfro. So this offense is set for success. It's going to be sound. It's going to be new. There will be some growing pains because it's a lot of new transfers, new staff, new system. But it will be sound because I trust Phil Longo. I trust Luke Fickell. There is an experienced quarterback, run game, offensive line. This offense will be something that maybe at the beginning of the year won't be top 10, but at the end of the year, I think it will be humming, and it will challenge any defense it faces with its schematics. And similarly to that, I would argue that Kansas is one of the best is going to have one of the best offenses in the country. And a lot of it will be due to schematics. Andy Kotelnicki has been one of the better offensive coordinators in my mind in college football for a few years, and Lance Leipold knew how to build an offense at Buffalo before he came to Kansas. Winning head coach, by the way, won several national titles at lower levels of football. Kansas is interesting because out of all the teams on this list, they definitely have the lowest blue chip talent, and it's by a lot. However, what they lack in blue chip production, they don't entirely make it up, but they make up a lot of it in returning production. They're number 2 in returning production. And I think multiple players for Kansas, multiple, will have breakout seasons. Multiple players will. And the Jayhawks have, I think, behind Caleb Williams, the nation's best quarterback in Jalen Daniels. They also have an underrated wide receiver room, with Lawrence Arnold and Luke Grimm nearly having 1,000-yard seasons last year and part of me expects them, if Jalen Daniels can stay healthy, part of me expects at least one of them to have a 1,000-yard receiving year in 2023. Combined, they have 170 career receptions, 2,304 career receiving yards, 18 career receiving touchdowns. This offense has elite skill players. I think one of their bigger questions is on the offensive line, and I think their offensive line will be set as well. But looking at Jalen Daniels, he led the nation in QBR for much of last year. If you just want to look at Jalen Daniels' individual quarterback statistics for 2022, because in 2020 he had a terrible year, and then in 2021 he was the backup to Jason Bean for much of the season. He threw for 2,014 yards in 2022. We're not talking about cumulative statistics here. 18 passing touchdowns, 4 interceptions, and he had an 87.9 QBR, which was third in the country. Kansas is going to be a force. Kansas is going to be an offense that will annoy a lot of people. I think Kansas's offense, and I've said this for some other offenses, how they can score or test any defense they face. I think that will be especially the case with Kansas because people will underestimate them from a talent perspective, but schematically and just schematically, they'll be so good. And their running threat is amazing because Jalen Daniels plus Devin Neal and Daniel Hishaw Jr., career-wise, they nearly have 3,000 rushing yards. All these statistics may be small compared to a team like Michigan, Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama, but this is the best that Kansas has had in quite some time. And where their defense completely lacks and stinks, their offense makes up for all of that and then some. At number 5, we have Kansas's Big 12 partner in crime in Texas. Now, Texas is the opposite of Kansas when it comes to blue chip talent. Texas has had questions at development for several years now, though I think Steve Sarkisian is going to reconcile this, and Sarkisian has also been recruiting better than previous regimes. Texas is poised to jump into that elite category that currently only Georgia, Alabama, and Ohio State occupy. They're poised to join those programs with the way that they're recruiting, especially on the offensive line. I think they will have one of the best O-lines in the country. I think their O-line, along with Kansas State, Michigan, I think those are going to be the top 3 offensive lines in the country in 2023. Will all compete for the Joe Moore Award. And then you have Oregon, you have Georgia, you have other schools that are very close to that top 3 and could contend for number 1 as well, other top 10 offensive lines. Texas, though, they return all 5 starting offensive linemen. All 5 of them. And they also return all their wide receivers. They return their starting quarterback. They return their starting tight end in Jatavion Sanders, who's one of the best tight ends in the nation. And even though Quinn Ewers had injuries last year, he only had really one true season of football. In 2021, he enrolled so late that he was never going to start. He was never going to play. In his really only true season of collegiate play, he had 172 completions out of 296 attempts, completed under 60% of his passes, barely had over 2,000 yards passing, 15 touchdown passes, 6 interceptions, and he had a 132.6 passer rating. Not very good. But with Malik Murphy and Arch Manning in his quarterback room, that'll give him some competition. And you bet that if Quinn Ewers doesn't have a good year or a good few games, he's getting benched in favor of Malik Murphy. Malik Murphy has, in my opinion, a much higher upside than Quinn Ewers does. He is more unproven, obviously, since he hasn't played, but I really like Malik Murphy, and I think if Texas wants to maximize their chance at success, and if they want to have an offense that is top 4, top 3, I think Malik Murphy will give you that. But I don't know more than Steve Sarkisian does. In fact, Steve Sarkisian is a genius play caller, and his offense, because of his play calling and preparation, and because they're solid at the line of scrimmage, they are going to carefully, methodically slice through opponents. Don't forget about Xavier Worthy and Jordan Whittington as well. Almost 3,000 career receiving yards, 25 receiving touchdowns in their career. And watch out for Cedric Baxter. Jonathan Brooks, Keelan Robinson, and then another guy whose name I forget are currently in the running for the running back rotation. But Cedric Baxter Jr., 5-star out of high school, I wouldn't be surprised if he was a day one contributor. Number 4, we have Utah. Utah at number 4 might surprise some of you. But when you look at their returning production, when you look at their running back room, when you look at their tight end room and how they've been able to develop tight ends, Dalton Kincaid, remember him? The guy who had, he could be targeted 20 times in a game, get hit 5 times more than that, and still be a reliable receiver. Remember him? Well, Brant Kuithe was injured early last season, and there are some Utah fans that I have seen who say that Kuithe is superior. He was the superior tight end. So I think he will easily replace Dalton Kincaid. You also have Thomas Yasmin. Both of them combined have over 2,000 career receiving yards and 22 career receiving touchdowns. Like Georgia, Utah's primary attack in the passing game is tight ends. Now, Georgia's statistically isn't as extreme as Utah's. I think Utah's is even more when you look at the ratio of passing yards that are targeted to tight ends versus wide receivers. I think Utah's is even more in favor of tight ends than Georgia's is, which is pretty crazy if you think about it. But Utah's offense is physical, smash mouth. They love to run it. I remember in 2021, and you saw this to a certain degree in 2022 as well, they would run it on 3rd and long and convert it. They have great trench play. They're deep at tight end. Their tight ends are good at blocking. They're good at receiving. They're clutch, 50-50 ball catch guys. They're big, physical. Cameron Rising is a good quarterback. He's one of the few, I think, true dual threat quarterbacks on this list. He has a career 711 attempts with 456 completions, 5,572 passing yards, 46 passing touchdowns, only 13 passing interceptions. Very effective quarterback, top 10 in QBR last year, nearly a 150 passer rating. Nearly 150. You also have the converted quarterback, Jaquindon Jackson, who transferred over from Texas, and you have Micah Bernard. Those will be the top 2 running backs. Jaquindon Jackson is fast, athletic. Micah Bernard has been with the program longer. Seems to me to be the more, he's the backup running back, even though it is a rotation. Jaquindon Jackson is far and away the better running back. This team is more of your traditional pro-style team, but unlike, let's say, Wisconsin or Iowa, who had poverty quarterback play for years, you have a great quarterback in Cameron Rising, and Iowa tight ends, who now have a reputation. Utah tight ends, in my opinion, deserve the same respect. Absolutely. Utah's offense will be an underrated force. They're very, very physical. So watch out for Utah as a whole. They're actually one of the better teams, Power 5-wise, in returning production. Watch out for them. At number 3, we have Michigan. The Michigan Wolverines very well could lead the nation in scoring. Now, USC, Kansas, Ohio State, heck, even Georgia, with how easy their schedule is, will have something to say about that. Have a lot to say about that. But there's no doubt that Michigan will have the nation's number 1 run game. No one compares to Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards as 2 starting running backs. Nicholas Singleton, Katron Allen, nope. Not Travion Henderson or Mayan Williams either. Nope. Now, those 2 could contend depending on how the season goes, but from a preseason standpoint, I don't necessarily, it'd be hard to make that argument. It wouldn't be impossible, but it would be hard to make that argument. Nonetheless, those are 2 elite running back rooms. Same with Chase McClellan and Roydell Williams at Alabama and others. We just looked at Jaquindon Jackson and Micah Bernard, but even those running back rooms don't compare to the upside that Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards have, especially Edwards. I mean, Edwards has the frame, the build of a unicorn at running back, and I'm excited to see what he does this season. Michigan at running back, nearly 4,000 career rushing yards, 41 career rushing touchdowns. That's insane. Nearly 600 career rushing attempts. And that's just Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards. I mean, CJ Stokes and Kalel Mullings got a decent amount of carries as well. Wide receiver would look to be barren for Michigan, and I know that J.J. McCarthy, after not having a good performance against TCU, has some questions. But I think J.J. is going to mature. He's going to be a great to near elite, potentially elite, though I'm not going to predict that until I see it. I'm going to stay with great, near elite quarterback, and Michigan's wide receiver core is underrated. They don't have the statistics of a great wide receiver room because Michigan loves to run the football. But they have some good, great wide receivers. Not Marvin Harrison Jr. or Emeka Ibuka or Roma Dunzi or Xavier Worthy level wide receivers. Not those, not even Troy Franklin, but they have some good, great wide receivers there. Cornelius Johnson, Roman Wilson being amongst them. And Michigan's offensive line, I think, will be, again, among the best in the country. They reload through the portal. They lose 3 starters. I think they lost both of their tackles and their center. I know Olguson Oluwatimi, who got drafted in the NFL. Same with Ryan Hayes. But they returned Zach Zinner, Trevor Keegan. They had many guys at tackle and even at guard when they had injuries who were very good players, highly rated according to PFF, get rotational playing time. And they bring in Ladarius Henderson, who's from Arizona State, at tackle. Drake Nugent, they bring in, starting center at Stanford, who's very, very highly rated according to PFF. He's more highly rated than Olu Oluwatimi, who was Michigan's starting center last year. And they also bring in Miles Hinton, younger brother of Christopher Hinton, in from Stanford as well. This Michigan offense it'll be like Georgia's. I think it will be better because Michigan will have more returning production, where Georgia will edge Michigan at receiver and obviously tight end. No one can compete with Brock Bowers. Michigan will make up with a slightly superior O-line, beyond superior running back room, and I think Michigan will actually have the better starting quarterback. Michigan obviously does not have the deeper quarterback room. Having Brock Vandegrift, Carson Beck, and Gunnar Stockton in one room is insane, but I think J.J. McCarthy's experience and higher raw talent will carry him away against Carson Beck. Michigan, Georgia, Utah, those are the offenses that like to grind it out. They like to get on their steel-toe boot and just kick you to death, while Ohio State, Texas, and Washington, who's up next at number 2, like to give you a quick and peaceful death by racking up points against you. But nonetheless, I think Michigan's offense could lead the nation in scoring because they have a somewhat easy schedule, especially in the non-conference, and they're just so powerful and return so much on offense and defense that they will choke teams pretty quickly. They'll strangle them very fast. At number 2, though, we have Washington. And what makes Washington special is not just their returning production, but plenty of things. Washington, for one, has Michael Penix Jr. Washington is a team, I think, when you look at things, I like to compare them to Tennessee. And I was just thinking about this today. But Tennessee, when we think of Tennessee, we think of up-tempo, we think of gobs of passing yards and passing touchdowns, we think of not having a great defense, but you have talent on defense, you have the potential to take it to the next level on defense. It's not like your USC or some of these other programs where their defensive scheme we just know is not good. But it's more so due to the style of play on the offensive side of the ball. That's the intense focus. I like to compare those two programs. Michael Penix had over 4,500 passing yards last season. Over half of his career passing yards, he had 8,838 career passing yards. Over half of them were made in 2022 alone. Did you also know that Washington had 2 1,000-yard wide receivers, Rome Odunze and Jalen McMillan? had 1,145 and 1,098 receiving yards, respectively. Odunze had 7 receiving touchdowns. McMillan had 9 receiving touchdowns. And from a career standpoint, they have over 3,000 career receiving yards. And those aren't the only 2 good wide receivers. You have Jalen Polk, who had almost 700 receiving yards, too, as the third man. And not only that, but you have Jeremy Bernard, who's coming back from Michigan State. He originally committed to Washington. High ceiling kind of wide receiver. I expect him to get some playing time. And you have Giles Jackson, who came from Michigan. And Giles Jackson is incredibly fast. Talk about wide receiver rooms. Texas, Ohio State, Washington, they're separated from the rest of the pack. Ohio State is 1A. Part of me would even put Washington up there with Ohio State at 1A and put Texas at 1B. Texas is Xavier Worthy, Noah Whittington, and they're going to have Adonai Mitchell and Isaiah Nayer, but Washington and Ohio State are much more proven. Ohio State obviously having the more NFL kind of wide receivers. Washington, maybe it's more like Tennessee, where it is more so schematics, but they have insanely talented wide receivers. They have a great, big, physical offensive line, and they have an underrated not wide receiver room, but running back room. Pardon me. Very underrated running back room. So I would look at Washington, and I think that their defense already is going to improve. This offense, I think, is going to improve yet again. I think it's going to be the Pac-12's best offense. And you heard me, best. If you're a USC fan, stay tuned to the end of the video because no, you're obviously not number one. That's Ohio State. Ohio State is the number one offense, and I don't even know if it's going to be close. I would say if there's anyone to contend for the number one offense, it wouldn't even be Washington. It wouldn't even be Utah. It would be fellow Big Ten team Michigan. It would be Georgia, or it would be Tennessee. It would be a Big Ten or SEC school just because they have the talent. They have enough star talent and blue chip talent to achieve that number one offensive trophy, which Ohio State has won year after year. They have the number one offense in efficiency metrics in 2021 and 2022. They were number one in scoring in 2021, number two in scoring in 2022. They have all their skill players minus quarterback returning. Mayan Williams, Travion Henderson, Marvin Harrison Jr., Emeka Egbuka, Julian Fleming. They're coming back. Same with tight end Cade Stover. And Kyle McCord, it's a similar situation to Carson Beck in Georgia here. You lost your starting quarterback, but you're very deep and talented at the position, and you have a reputation at the position. Ohio State's reputation is much better than Georgia's, and Georgia's is already good as it is. Ohio State has an elite reputation at the position. Kyle McCord only has 58 passing attempts, but he's completed 70% of his passes. He averages over 10 yards per passing attempt currently. 3 passing touchdowns, 1 interception. He has nearly a 170 passer rating. And for Ohio State, their run game will be one of the nation's best. It's kind of a bold prediction. But if Williams and Henderson can stay healthy, and you do have Dallin Hayden as well as an NFL running back, who's the third stringer there and who's elected to stay, when you have both of your starting guards returning, and that's what Ohio State has. They have Donovan Jackson and Matthew Jones both returning. Carson Hinsman and Jacob James are battling out for center, but I think either of them will be an all Big Ten caliber center. The middle and interior of that O-line is going to be unstoppable. No one will be able to shut it down. They'll be able to limit it. They'll maybe be able to do what Georgia does, where Georgia can make teams one-dimensional, but they won't be able to stop Ohio State's running attack if it can stay healthy. Not even a defense like Georgia's or Iowa's or Michigan's or Ohio State's defenses pre-2022, though I think their defense will improve and be elite, but that's for a separate video. No one, this run game, if healthy, will be on the level of Michigan's. It'll be on the level of Penn State's if Penn State had an elite O-line, which they might, but part of the reason why they weren't in the top 10 was because I don't know if they will. But Ohio State, it's a safe pick for them to be the number one offense. Whoever starts at quarterback will have a fantastic season, and Marvin Harrison Jr. will win the Biletnikoff Award this season, which he was snubbed from last season. So that is number 10 through number 1 offenses in the country. That's my projection for top 10 offenses for the 2023 college football season. I want to spend a minute talking about some teams that did not make the list, specifically USC, Clemson, Alabama, Penn State, North Carolina. Those were all inside my top 15. Those were inside my top 15. I have USC as my 11th best offense, Clemson as my 12th, North Carolina 13th, Penn State 14th, Alabama 15th. And I think that for USC, a lot of it comes down to questions at O-line, tight end, and I don't think their running back room is at the caliber that a lot of these teams are. Outside of Tennessee and Georgia, every team inside this top 10 has a better running back room than USC. USC is the nation's number 1 quarterback, and they do have a great wide receiver room, but questions at O-line, tight end, and they don't have Ohio State, Washington, or Texas level wide receivers. That's why they're just outside the top 10. Just outside the top 10. Clemson and the rest are sort of self-explanatory. They all have question marks themselves, especially Alabama at quarterback. This list is subject to change, and this list is more intended to be best offense by terms of efficiency than it is by points per game. USC will be top 5 in points per game. If they aren't top 5 in points per game, that would be heresy. So, thank you all for watching this video, this analysis. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and if you're listening via Spotify, please follow the channel. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.